Ooh, what is this? We're doing a scene analysis today. That's right. Today is scene analysis day. Very exciting stuff. I'm gonna wait for just a minute, just to see if anyone's gonna hop on, and then yeah, we'll go through the scene. So I'll give people a couple minutes, just in case if someone hops in and it's like, whoa, what are you talking about? All right, cool. Hey, maybe someone's here, so maybe I can begin. Yeah, Perfect Blue is actually one of the first movies I did a really big analysis on, where like I actually went through the movie shot by shot, and tried to figure out what techniques they were using throughout the whole movie. And that's because the movie has pretty funky editing, as you might say, and its narrative can be a little hard to follow, intentionally so. And so when I was like, just out of college and I saw Perfect Blue, I was like, geez Louise. I was like, this is using a lot of techniques I have no idea how they work. I have no idea how the director got the emotions that I'm feeling when watching this movie. And so I was like, I need to go through this movie and understand it inside and out. And yeah, so I did that years ago. And so yeah, let's do I'll do a little discussion on this. Okay, cool. I think I can begin now. So, just to give a little background for people who may not have seen Perfect Blue or know what the movie's about. Perfect Blue is a movie about an actress, a Japanese pop star, who's trying to get into the movie industry, and she's leaving the music industry. And so this is right after the opening of the movie, where she's officially leaving music and she's going to leave it behind and move towards acting. And so this little montage sequence is just of her walking home. So going back to eye tracking, which I've talked about in the past, it's important to know where your actions are happening and to keep it consistent from shot to shot, so that way it is easier for the audience to follow what's happening. So here we have this little montage. I'm scrubbing through it at a speed that's not original to the film. So you see here, we start on this wide shot, and we actually already have something moving in the screen. We actually have this element that Storyboard Pro does not want me to draw on. Oh, maybe it's because my Cintiq is not plugged in, like, at all. Give me a second. My Cintiq is now plugged in. Okay. So, in this scene, in this opening shot, we actually already have action happening here on the top third. Okay. So, you see here we have this train, or this train moving from, which direction is it moving? It's moving left to right. Okay, cool. And then what we do is we cut to here. We actually, compositionally, still have this line here that's kind of going through the composition. And then she walks up to that point. So there's kind of this rule that's happening in this scene, that everything is leading towards this top third of the composition. And then here, we cut, and while it isn't the exact same location, it is still on the same third line. Like, she's still here. And so this is something that like beginning storyboard artists may not realize, is that you can still have characters up on the top third line, without necessarily doing all high angle shots, because there's kind of a basic rule. I think it was in the movie, what was the movie that Steven Spielberg did recently? I forget. Anyway, but it's kind of like, you know, your horizon line is either supposed to be high or your horizon line is supposed to be low. It's like, that's it. But you can actually still have characters up on the top third of the line, and at a high elevation while still technically being a low angle shot. So like, see this is technically a lower angle shot. And then you see here, she's still moving across the top third of the composition. I mean, technically her head's near the very top of the composition. But you notice the primary line of action. So you see here to here to this car is meeting right up to it. And then here, the car is riding right along that same line that's already been established over the last several shots. So that line throughout all these shots is maintained. And see, she's going right to left. And then what do you know? She moves right into this line again. So, see, it's very consistent throughout this entire montage. Everything happens on that line. Nothing leaves that line, like ever, in the entire sequence. Now, granted, this isn't supposed to be an exciting montage. This is supposed to be a very relaxing montage. And part of the way that they do that, by make this scene relaxing, is that your eye isn't moving all over the place. Like, your eye isn't getting distracted by a whole bunch of crazy things happening. Now, for instance, the movie City of God, its opening, is very, very hectic. And there's a lot of things happening in a lot of different directions. But this scene, because it's supposed to be chill, you know, nothing too exciting happens. Everything, you know where to look, basically, the whole time. You could also maybe argue that this transformer here is then also used for the cut, because they're almost in the exact same position. By the way. Okay, cool. So here's opening. So which direction is she going right now? She is going right to left. Okay. Right to left. We're now going to get into continuity. So this movie's also really good at having breaks in continuity and time jumping and stuff like that, and making it very clear, but also startling. So she's going right to left, you know, and she gets to the door. Okay. So she put, you know, strong right to left. She's putting her keys in the door and she opens it, and now it's a reversal. It's someone else in a different time or place now going left to right, but it's her. That's her. That's the main character. That's Mima. So she's going through a door that's going left to right, and then now in this sequence, as she's walking, the whole sequence is left to right. So see, she's going this way, and then it goes right to left again, and then now she's back into the present. So, okay, why is this interesting? Why is this weird? Okay, so she's going right to left. And what they do is that they use this left to right break here to do a jump in time. Because what they did is they essentially, they jumped the 180, essentially. Is they jumped it, and so they know that you know that there's a break and kind of an error that occurred. And because of that, I guess maybe you could argue it's not a 180 jump. Yeah, it kind of is. I don't know. Whatever. They know that you know as the audience that something weird happened, and so that your brain already knows this must be a different time or place. Also the fact that, you know, there's a crowd of people and there's this guy here that wasn't here in the scene beforehand. However, if this scene were done in a right to left direction instead of left to right, I don't think the audience would have really picked up that this is a big jump in time and place. Basically, if this scene had continued in the exact same direction, then the audience would have tripped. They would have been like, whoa, wait a minute, is this a whole bunch of people in her bedroom? Like, what's going on? But because it goes in the opposite direction, it's much more obvious that something's changed. And here we have her going left to right. And then what they do is that they actually reorient her to go back to right to left. So you see now she's going right to left. Also notice, she's still moving on this top third line. Like, even from this montage, top third line. Here, she's still, I guess she's centered. But either way, they're trying to make the scene feel relaxed, not too intense. So they're kind of keeping things higher up in the composition instead of more dynamic, and much lower. So either way, she's moving through this crowd and she's going right to left. And because of her going right to left, it kind of reorients her towards progress, if that makes sense. It's hard for me to explain with words, but essentially they're reorienting her back into the timeline that we were in the beginning. So here she's going right to left, and then they go left to right, but they need her to go right to left so that when we go back into the present, we get this shot. So you see she turns, and now she's back into the present. So yeah, see, she's in the past. She hears someone says, "I'm always looking at Mima's room," which sounds really creepy. She thinks she might have a stalker when she hears that, and she turns around, and now she's in the present, because in the present, she's remembering that thing that was told to her earlier that day. So if this shot, this scene of her going left to right, had continued in a left to right format, this cut wouldn't have worked, because she would have been facing in, this direction. And then when she would do a reversal, it wouldn't match with this cut. So you see, a lot of this movie is this movie is pretty clever and smart with its screen direction and screen continuity and like eye tracking and everything, where it's paying attention to, I don't know, it's paying attention to the way that characters are facing so as to make time jumps make more sense and to not be too confusing. Alright, so either way, she turns around because she's in the present and she just remembered that thing that was told to her earlier that day, that there's someone who's looking in her room. And so she's a little nervous. Now, as you may have noticed, there's a lot of red in this composition, right here, right behind the corner. See, earlier, this was the sunset. So it's like, nice pretty sunset. But now, it looks like a warning light. It genuinely looks like there's a warning light. And so this is capturing the character's emotions, that she is startled and she's a little bit nervous, but she still feels relatively safe. I also like the fact that this shot is used with a very long lens, which almost looks like it's someone who's watching her. It kind of adds to the feeling. Here's her looking through. She closes the door. All right, she feels safe. So what's neat about this whole sequence, you know what? I might just play this. I'll scrub through it. Just for legal reasons, maybe. So she closes the door. She's talking about food and getting stuff. Just walking around. Lies down in bed. See all of her stuff. See her room. Okay, so what's interesting in this sequence is there's a pretty big emphasis on not showing her face. Because all day she's basically been putting up this like pop idol, pop star like persona. And when she gets home, there's not much of there's always something that's kind of blocking her face. Like for instance, like this shot. Or here, she's turning on the water to fill up her bathtub. I guess that's how it works over there. Just hang up her clothes. Okay, sorry. Very basic rule here. I'm going back now. Because this was trying to feel kind of like a montage, we're getting a lot of this left to right, right to left. So you see this action is going to be right to left to right. This one's another left to right, so that's a little weird. Left to right to left to right. So it's going back and forth to make it feel like she's moving around the house and she's doing different activities. If these activities were all to be in the same direction, it wouldn't feel as much as if she's like traveling around. Actually, interestingly, if you map out the layout of her room in this scene, she isn't actually always going right to left to right. Some of the actions are still right to left in terms of physical space, but whatever. Anyway, she puts down these notes here. She drops them on the table, but she's not looking at them. She goes to these fish, which are important to the plot. Man, this movie has an obsession with this top third line. It's always there. Okay, important shot. She's looking at her fish, and she said she forgot to feed them yesterday. I hope this doesn't come into the plot later. Now, interestingly, we get to see this window back here, which is going to be very relevant later in the movie. And by later, I mean a minute. Okay, she poofs down on her bed, and we get to see a little bit of her room. Now, the point of this shot, in terms of narrative, is that it's establishing, like, hey, she has all this stuff, but she lives in a very small world. She may be a pop star, but her world is ultimately pretty tiny. So this is an interesting series of shots, because these three are all 4 seconds long. Okay, sorry, this is like a hyper obsession. Because I also figured out the timing of all these shots. I noticed in anime specifically, I think more in the 90s, they'd do this thing where they would have like 3 or 4 shots that are 4 seconds long. So you see this one's 4 seconds long, this one's 4 seconds long, this one's 4 seconds long. You know what, I'll just play through it, just so you get kind of a feel for what it is. It is weird that I'm talking so much about this without actually playing through it. Again, kind of for copyright reasons, I think, but actually I think because this is a commentary, it's free to do this. But so you see there, we get a shot, then another shot. There's people on the TV. We get another shot. And so this kind of timing helps ease us into this new scene, because so far we've had okay, hold on. You know, we've had her being a pop idol beforehand and walking around and cleaning up her room and everything. And so this is specifically set to just establish what's the interior of her room, what does it look like, which is actually important later on in the movie because things change in her room. They may not have noticed. So this is another interesting shot where, okay, in terms of focus, we have what? Right to left. Then we kind of have this as if we're going left to right in the opposite direction. And then we have right to left going in this direction. What's weird about this is this feels like 2 different walls. See? Feels like this is one side of the wall, this is another side of the wall. The weird thing is that these are actually both the same wall. And so like both of these shots are actually all on this wall. So really all the camera did is it just went from here to here. That's it. Which feels weird when you think about it in space. However, the way that it's edited and the way that you can't ever see the other part of the wall, this kind of almost feels like it's 2 different walls. Also because they're lit differently. Either way, small note. It's a very slight note. Okay, so she looks, she sees the posters on the wall. She doesn't like it. It almost looks like they're looking at her. She puts it away. You know what? I'll just play through this scene. Sorry, it's rendering. Storyboard Pro takes a long time to play back videos. Okay. Yeah, Storyboard Pro lags like crazy. Alright. So she's reading her notes. I always like looking to Mima's room. I put up a link to Mima's room. So see, this is second line of evidence that maybe she has a stalker or someone who's following her. And then the phone rings, which then almost makes her think that maybe it's related to the letter. But then it turns out it's her mother who's on the phone. Alright, so I'm gonna let this scene play through. And then I'll explain some of the cool things that are happening in it. But yeah, either way, she's talking on the phone with her mom, so the tension's decreasing in the scene. So the fact that she had multiple notes that kind of sound like there's someone who's stalking her, and she's a little bit nervous because she's also changing her career. But now she's talking to her mom, so this makes the scene much more laid back and less intense. Except she gets another call in the line. And all she can hear is just creepy, heavy breathing on the other end of the phone. And then she goes back to her mom on the phone. But then now there's a siren going off. So she goes to the siren, which is the bathtub, because she had a timer set for it. And then there's another sound, but it's from her fax machine. And it's a very scary note that says traitor, traitor, traitor. So now she knows that someone is actually, in fact, stalking her. Okay, so I just played through a whole bunch. But I'm gonna actually walk through some of this. And I want to share the audio, but I feel like I might get caught. If I upload it onto YouTube, I might run into some issues. I don't know. Okay, so what's cool in this scene is we're building up this tension as to how does Mima actually feel? Like, is there a stalker? Is there not a stalker? Is she just misinterpreting things? Like, what's happening? So when she is safe, we look at her from this side. So when she's facing right to left, and we're looking into the room, even though there's this bright red. Now remember, red in this movie is like used as a warning sign. So there's kind of this weird warning sign in the background that there's so much red. But whenever we see her from this angle, this is her when she is mostly relaxed. But then as soon as she reads the line, I've put up a link to Mima's room, because that creeps her out. She's like, what is this? We now see her from this side. Okay, well, why do we do that? Well, because we need to see the window. And so what we notice in this shot is that the buildings all the way over there are actually really tiny. So they're small, they're far away, they're not very close to us. So it's some sort of threat in the distance, but, you know, she suddenly feels exposed because she's kind of like, wait a minute, there's a link to my room? Is someone watching me? And she looks. And so what happens in this shot is that, there's this huge temptation to like, close the window or hide over here. But obviously you wouldn't want to go over here because that's kind of crossing the line of sight of a theoretical stalker. There's kind of this invisible line. Actually, there's literally a physical line in the composition right there. You see the window? There's literally a line right there. And so there's this line of, she wouldn't want to go to screen right, but then what happens is the phone rings, which forces her to go over here. And so she even notices that she crossed a line. As you see here, she even looks back. So she reaches for the phone and she looks back because she's still thinking, wait a minute, is there like someone over there? Is there someone watching me? And so this shot, whenever we can see the window, is when she's more nervous. So again, when we see her face like this, she's not nervous. When we see the window, she's nervous. Also notice her face is lit here, but here her face is in the shadows. So when she picks up the phone, her face is in the shadows and we can see the buildings. And the reason for this is because based off of movie cliches and her fears, she thinks that maybe the person on the phone is, I don't know, maybe it's the stalker. As she was reading the letter, that the person on the phone would be the person who wrote that same letter. However, something interesting happened here. As she picks it up and gets nervous, see her face, she's nervous. The buildings are actually closer. This is because the lens length changed. But they're a little bit closer. And it kind of makes it feel like that whoever's following her might be closer. But then she's like, oh, it's mom. And then we cut to this angle. So you see now we're now going right to left again. And that's because she's no longer nervous. And you see now everything's well lit. Here she's in shadows and it's she's nervous. Ooh, spooky. It's mom? Okay, she's fine. She's relaxed. And so that is actually, either way, that's cool. That they're choosing to show her mood just by hopping from one side to the other. And so as she's talking, she's talking to her mom. She's like, yeah, I left the movie industry. And then what happens is someone else joins the line. So someone else joins the phone line. And all she hears is heavy breathing. And see, now we cut to, she's nervous. And she's in the shadows again. And you notice these buildings are getting closer. They're filling up more of the composition in the background. And there's even this little thing here, which is, I think, a chimney or something like that from this building. But it almost looks like there's a person in the window. And so there isn't a person in the window, but it almost looks like it. Like, the way I'm pretty sure that's intentional to make it almost feel like for a brief second, like, hey, wait a minute, is that someone there? But it isn't. And then she realizes that there's no one on the line, even though we can hear heavy breathing. She's just kind of like, some weirdo. And so now she's comfortable again. So she's no longer thinking about the fact that there could be someone stalking her. Then what happens is her timer goes off. So we get this loud beeping that literally sounds like the soundtrack to Psycho in the bathtub. So it's kind of funny because, in Psycho, there's a famous murder scene in the bathtub, and her timer literally sounds like the Psycho soundtrack from the shower scene. So she's now over here, right to left. So she's really far away. And then she hears a phone call, and she thinks it's her mom, but it's actually the fax machine, which has a red light, because, in this movie, red equals danger. And she's being sent something, and it's a letter. And you see, now we have her in dark lighting again, because she sees something that's making her nervous. It's big, scary text and font. It says, traitor, traitor, traitor. Something a crazy person would send. And then what happens is she turns, and she's now engulfed by the darkness in the cityscape she was trying to hide from. or that she was fearful of. And you see then she closes the blinds on her windows, so she just closed it. And then we also, right as the scene's ending, we get this train here. Which is where the scene started. Remember, this scene started with a train going right to left. And now we have a train going, I mean, it was going left to right. And now it's going right to left in the opposite direction. So the scene comes full circle. Starts with train, ends with train. This is actually a plot point that is used later on in the movie. The positioning of this train. You don't realize it's important, but it becomes important to the plot later on. So the movie is setting up all these little details that become relevant. But either way, yeah, no. So either way, just to go through this very briefly, the background throughout the scene, the city background, is just getting bigger and bigger throughout the scene. So it's like, oh man, is there really someone stalking her? Maybe she's just... Maybe there isn't. It's still kind of far away. Okay, maybe it's a little closer. It's like, oh, maybe there's nothing to worry about. It's like, okay, maybe it's actually closer. Maybe her fears are real. And it's like, nah, her fears aren't real. And it's like, okay. She goes, see, there's not much city. It's kind of tucked away. She's not really concerned about it. And it's like, oh, wait a minute. No, her fears are very, very real. And so now that's why we pull back this big scary city shot. And so either way, I think it's just a neat technique that this movie's using. Just the lens length on the city and how much of the city background fills up the composition to show what she's feeling. And based off of how much of the frame it fills up, we can tell as to how nervous she is. All right. So yeah, either way, this is a neat scene. It has, eye tracking, good control of screen direction, which ways the characters are walking. And something I've noticed about like this movie and anime in general is I think it's easier to pick up on certain film techniques in anime because it's more constrained and there's less extra noise. Like there might be a lot of stuff happening, but everything is still broken down to its simplest parts. Versus in live action, I think sometimes it's easy to get distracted by every time an actor's head twitches or moves. Versus in anime, because everyone's like mostly static, unless they're doing an important action, I think it's a little bit easier to track like, oh, this is what technique they're using. It's like, oh, they're using this technique. Also, because in anime, they have to figure out all their shots beforehand, versus in live action, sometimes scenes are made without storyboards, so they kind of like make them on the fly. So anyway, cool scene. I gotta go. Thank you all for watching. For anyone who dropped by. Yeah, I don't know if I'm gonna do more scenes from Perfect Blue or not. I did an analysis on basically at least like 3/4 of the movie. Years ago, where I just went through all of it, and there was a lot of cool things I learned from it. It was like, okay, this movie has a lot of great editing techniques and whatnot. All right, I'll see ya. Bye.